All right, guys, oral sessions today. Jim Perry from Defy Professional Wrestling. How are you?
I'm so good. I'm so tired today, but
Why? What's going on?
the world is back open and it's
Yeah.
crazy. So right
Yeah.
after we saw each other at Defy, I was on a plane and I went to Indianapolis, and then 2 hours after that I was in somewhere deep in the rural forests of Indiana doing a Euphomet taping. And so it kind of was just these things all and my schedule for this week is the same, and it's not stopping, and it's great, but it's definitely like, hey, remember this? Like life again.
Oh, it's like it is a shock to the system. You're like, wait, I was like doing my own schedule and really have to be anywhere for a while, and now it's like, yeah, you're being hit from all angles.
Yeah.
Where do you have to go next?
Next is going to be easy. Next will be Los Angeles.
Okay.
So that'll be fun. And then after that, back to the Midwest, I got to fly into Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm going to be in
That's our
Ohio,
place.
and then driving up to this town called Post Town,
Okay.
which I guess is like 45 minutes north of Cincinnati. And it has people allege a tremendously haunted elementary school there, like closed
Oh
down
my God.
elementary school.
Okay, I love all
Yeah.
this stuff so much. So this is the very first like Halloween-esque episode that we're doing. It's October, of course. I've got on my pumpkin hat. I am
Yeah.
not messing around. First, tell everyone about Euphomet. Tell us about the
Yeah.
podcast, about the show, about your whole background and doing these docuseries.
Yeah. I started doing these docuseries back in 2018 for my show Euphomet, which is available like anywhere podcasts are. So if you want to listen to it, just find it there.
What is
And
Euphomet? What does that
I made
mean?
it up. Yeah, I
Oh,
made up
okay.
the word. Yeah, like back when I started the show, it was just an interview show.
Mhm.
And I just wanted something that was brandable and ownable. I come from like an agency background, a creative agency background. And so I took a lot of those things that I picked up over the years doing that and just kind of started to apply into my own stuff. And the first thing I thought was like, when you're dealing with the paranormal, every version of sort of like a paranormal word has been used before.
Okay.
Strange, spooky, like just name it. There's like some play on it. Somebody's already took the URL. Somebody has a podcast already. So I started thinking about things that were interesting to me about the paranormal. One of the phenomenons that's sort of fascinating, the theory about how the paranormal works, is that it's sort of like a trickster. Like people are kind of being tricked by the paranormal, and there's almost like a playful nature to it, but it's also kind of dark. So I started thinking of like, okay, what's a euphemism for like a tricky devil? And like, oh, euphemistic, Baphomet, like Euphomet. Okay, I'll just smash those two together, and it just sounded fun.
I
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
All
yeah,
right. Yeah. I mean, making up words. You're made up a word. And it
right.
seems believable. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's you know what compelled me to do Euphomet in general is like my origin story like is very tied together with Defy as well, because they both started happening at the same time in my life.
Okay.
I was a creative director for an ad agency. I was doing a lot of like commercial work and social media stuff for Fortune 100 companies that everybody knows who they are. And at the same time, I was becoming very disillusioned with that process, and it was burning me out to a crisp. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, I don't care about this stuff. I'm just selling things.
Mhm.
So I started having anxiety issues. Had to go to the ER one time for a panic attack.
Love a
And it
good
was like,
panic attack. Love a panic attack.
right? And so I was
Fuck.
like, something needs to change here. And so I started looking at things that I used to really, really love. One of the things was wrestling. And another one of those things was paranormal late night talk radio. And so I found a bunch of old archives of like 1990s paranormal stuff. I started watching wrestling again, coincidentally, like with the emergence of the Shield, coincidentally, like that,
Yeah.
just that era. So there was some familiar faces like on TV at that time.
Mhm.
And I started to connect with it in a way where I was like, listen, I'm not going to do anything with this stuff. It's not going to inspire me to be a part of it, but it will be kind of therapeutic to connect with that little kid again and just like relax. Well, I kind of messed up because I did get super inspired by both things. And it led to me launching Defy Wrestling shortly after, and it led to me starting that podcast back in both of those things back in like 2015, 2016.
Damn.
So you've met in general though, like although it was originally an interview series, it's now a documentary series. And so I have the opportunity to go and travel the country and embed myself with the subjects for sometimes a couple days and really get a sense of what their experience in the paranormal has been. Usually these are people that are dealing with something transformational that has occurred because of something unknown that has happened to them. And so we'll go on adventures, we'll talk about the phenomenon, but then I'll also get an opportunity to like actually hear about them and like what is happening. Are you seeing a ghost right now?
Sorry, John's trying to ask what? Oh, it's on the bookshelf.
He's like, are you talking about Bigfoot yet?
Oh,
Because this is what
if we're talking Bigfoot, he's like, give me a mic, give me some headphones. He was like mouthing to me, and I'm like, I don't know what you're trying to. And he has like a flight to catch, so I'm like, oh fuck, what does he need from me? Sorry.
Yeah, get out of here.
Yeah, beat it.
Beat it, Mox.
Honestly, God, I don't know where I put your book. Fuck. Okay, sorry. So carry on. That was very rude of me, but mostly rude of John.
Yeah,
I was the
well,
byproduct of his rudeness.
Naturally. Yeah, no, I mean that's it. It was it was an opportunity for me to connect with individuals that were also experiencing a lot of tremendous unknown things in their life. And it happened to lead me to some really great adventures and connecting base with some people with some really wild experiences and also very divergent kind of belief systems and how they identify themselves. And so, yeah.
Okay, so have you had paranormal experiences?
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
What was your first experience with the paranormal?
Well, the first experience I had with the paranormal was actually within my family. My grandma and my mom were very close. And I remember distinctly as a child sitting there, like watching TV, and my mom would walk up to the telephone and pick it up and start talking to my grandma without it ever ringing. And conversely, the same thing. I'd be with my grandma, she'd walk over to the phone, pick it up, start talking to my mom, and it would happen. It's not hyperbole when I say it would happen almost every day. These two had such a crazy connection like that.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so I later learned that kind of like ran throughout the family on the woman's side of the family, and that it was a common thing for them, and they just called it their ESP ability, and they didn't really hype it up or kind of make it a big deal. And so for me, it allowed me to like step into a world where I was like, I don't know, like a lot of stuff is possible, I guess. Like this stuff is just normal, I guess. And then the other childhood experience I had was just, I think it was potentially something called ball lightning. Folks in other parts of the country where it becomes incredibly humid and the temperature changes drastically can experience these huge balls of lightning, like glowing orbs that can sort of move around indeterminately and like almost have their own life force or something. And they're usually very fleeting, but they can really scare the shit out of you too if you don't know what it is.
Yeah. Where would something like that happen?
I think it's actually pretty common in the Midwest.
Great.
And some of the southern states. So yeah, get ready. And and yeah, I saw it at my grandfather's house. I was probably watching like an old like WCW Saturday night in the 90s or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there watching the TV, and this ball of light, this orb, emerges from the television, flies over my head as I'm sitting on the ground, takes a corner, turns into the kitchen, and then flies out the kitchen door.
What?
And I'll never forget that in my life. So, these are the type of things, though, I think that for me as a kid, those are things that you experience. It kind of piques your interest. You go, what else could be there?
Mm-hmm.
You maybe investigate to a certain degree, and then just life kind of happens. Sure. And it sends you in a different trajectory. And I think a lot of people share that experience of having spooky things happen when they're a
Yeah.
child, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe you are familiar, I know, in which I want to ask you about, if that's okay.
Of course.
And then I think like it takes, maybe it never emerges again with people because they're sort of in the flow of life, kind of the consensus idea of reality. But
Mhm.
for other folks, like these things can start creeping back into their life if they just kind of like open up their minds to it a little bit, I think.
Right. And that's so is that why it's a thing that affects children more than it does adults, because they're like bright-eyed and just kind of absorbing everything, and their minds have not already been shaped into this like work regimen that we all are in?
Yeah, many people would say that. Yeah, I think there's this idea that children also have this ability to be connected to the other side in a greater degree.
Yeah.
There was a book by this author, Leslie Kane, who does a lot of work for the New York Times. And this book, Surviving Death, which was also created into a Netflix series, which people can watch right now.
Oh.
There's a lot of scientific evidence
Oh,
showing
I've
that,
seen that show. I know what you're
yeah,
talking about. Yeah.
right. And so like kids that, start telling their parents about potentially what could have been a past life of theirs.
That's my fear. If my
Oh my
kid
gosh.
starts doing that, I'm out. I don't know
I
where
oh
I'm leaving
yeah,
her, but she
right,
got to go somewhere else.
yeah, doorstep. That's
Fire.
doorstep somewhere.
Grandma?
Yeah, right. I mean, listen, we joke about it, but there's a potential that that's like actually happened to people in the past.
Yeah.
And that once their children start exhibiting like this higher level of connection of something else, maybe a greater degree of observance of some of these things, that one of the things that like sort of beats that out of them in a way, it's a terrible way to describe it, but like one thing that pressures them to leave that behind, I think, is the pressure socially of others within their family and friends and everything else, where it becomes just something fun
Mhm.
and something that you should just forget about because that imaginary friend you had was just a figment of your imagination. And
Right.
probably almost all the time it is, right? But are there occasions when that's not the case?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, if there is a situation where there's a ghost talking to a child or communicating, like that's so, I mean, who knows what this is. But when I was pregnant with Nora, um, in one of my ultrasounds, it looks like there's a face in the ultrasound. So
What?
it's trippy. So I saw it and I was like, I think I'm making that up. So I said nothing, but I just sent my mom the ultrasounds because you could see the baby in them. And she was like, there's a face in there. I'm like, I know, I saw that too, but I was trying to pretend there wasn't. And what's crazier is that this face looks just like my great grandmother.
Oh
So it
no.
looks like my mom's grandmother, and it is eerie. I kept looking at it, and my mom was showing it to other family members, and yeah, I mean, I kept seeing this too, and it's trippy. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, at least like if that was something, so I did look that up, and there is like there's a whole forum, of course, online of like other women saying that they had been able to see things in ultrasounds that looked like it was a past family member, or you
Wow.
can see that it looks like an actual face. I should actually get this photo to use for a social clip for this,
Yeah,
just so
very
that
much
other people
so.
can see it because it is
Yeah.
trippy. Um,
Oh my
but then I
gosh.
started to like think, I'm like, okay, well, I mean, hey, if that was my great nanny Shay, who I never met, I never got to meet her. At least I know everyone loved her. She was like a lovely, sweet woman. So if she
Mm.
happens to be looking over my daughter, who is named after my grandmother, who is my
Mm.
great grandmother's daughter, that does that make sense in the family tree for everybody? So yeah, I don't know if yeah, I don't know what it was, but it was very eerie. But there's a whole thing online of other women saying that they saw the same thing, and it looks
Yeah.
like a family member, it looks like a face or whatever. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's trippy, man.
Holy smokes, that's
So if my
amazing.
kids start speaking to uh Gertie
Yeah.
and she starts having a best friend, I'll be like, oh shit. She's been over like looking over my child this entire time. Yeah. And
Right.
and when I was pregnant, I was watching another show on Netflix, I think of oh fuck, what is it called? My child. It's a thing about kids having past lives. And
Mhm.
it's crazy. These kids like that, like could this one little girl could fully draw out the map of the Titanic. saying that they were one of the people that was like on the
What?
Titanic and helped to engineer and to build it. And they kept drawing like the smokestacks that were on the Titanic. And
Yeah.
there was some kind of thing of one of them didn't work. So one of them didn't have smoke billowing out of it. And the drawing she did. And she was like, well, yeah, because it actually was not a functioning one. And the mom went and
Yeah.
did research on the Titanic and was like, holy shit, how could she have known that? Like
Holy
that stuff
smokes.
blows my mind. And I
It's
believe
insane.
it. I mean, I do believe in like past lives and being old souls and having like experienced different parts of the world and different generations of the world. Like I can totally buy into that.
Yeah.
I don't
Well, I
know
mean,
how that works, but
yeah. Well, I mean, the thing with it is that beyond belief, because I like to believe as well.
mhm,
I have to be very careful with my work to say I believe about certain things, because the topics and individuals that I'm working with and trying to tell their story, help them share their story, are very divergent and very varied. If I go into the route of sort of convincing myself to fully fall into belief, I feel like it's a slippery slope until I
mhm.
stop doing this work, and I can go like full wild belief man.
So is
But
that because when you're working with these people that they'll think you're like wacko jacko and that you're just trying to like make them believe it, that it's all sort of like a sleight of hand trick kind of
yeah,
situation?
yeah, to definitely, that's part of it, to ease the subject's mind that I'm not going to not believe them, that I'm there to support them in their beliefs and their systems and what their experiences have been.
Mhm.
uh and I think the lesser they know sometimes about what my belief system may be, the the better I'll be able to help them relate to me as kind of
Yeah.
like a a blank slate. And same with the listeners, right? So Euphomet has listened to a lot of people that don't watch like sort of ghost shows. It's done in sort of like a public radio style. So I wanted to make it where individuals who are maybe just curious about the subject can kind of like lose themselves in the stories of other people
Right.
and get lost in that human narrative without being sort of intimidated by the level of this is all real and you gotta believe it, because I would never want to try to like ask people that, because of the nature of the topics that are discussed. Like some of them are pretty far out there per like sort of typical standards. I mean, we had
Right.
an episode where, I mean, just an example, a lovely guy named Balthazar, who is,
Balthazar, what a name.
yeah, Balthazar Ashanti-san is his name.
Mm.
I believe it was like sort of inherited by some messages that he received and by like who his mentors were, but he's a voodoo priest and a vampire in New Orleans.
Oh my God.
And so what reminded me of this story a little bit is when you talked about like you had your experience and you went online and there were forums.
Mhm.
One of the ways I find a lot of subjects are sort of through these forums, because all throughout the internet are these communities of people that have either identify as something very fringe, uh, per like sort of popular belief systems, or just need to share this crazy story, and they
Yeah.
find somehow it siphons down into people that had shared such similar experiences that you can't help but create community around those like very specific situations. So Balthasar is like a representative of the vampire community in New Orleans.
Wow.
And this is a group that, uh, when they collect together in groups, they refer to themselves as houses. So he's the head of a house, and according to him, there are houses in every city and town in America and around the world, and we just don't know. So there are these secret houses of
God, I
real
love that.
vampires. Most of them, I'll say, are not malicious. They do drink human blood because there's a belief system that physiologically they are getting something from it.
Where do they
Sort
get
of
the human
even,
blood from?
well, so it's really interesting. Most houses form groups with donors. And so, in addition to the vampires, there's this donor community. And these are people that essentially sign contracts. I'll speak for Balthazar because the community is so like divergent and different depending on the house. But for
Okay.
Balthasar, for example, he's put together a contract, and the contract is similar to what people will see. I don't what he referenced as like maybe the S&M or bondage community,
Okay.
like the slave master type of thing, where it's like this physical contract that states you'll be a donor. We'll do this regimen of testing between ourselves, like blood work and all these different things to make this as safe as possible. And here's like sort of a schedule of when you'll donate blood to me. And sometimes it'll be as much as I think what did he say? Like a quart potentially of blood
Holy shit.
throughout a certain period of time. And usually, the methods are different too. Sometimes it'll be sometimes they'll place it in a bag, etc. Most of the time, and for Balthazar, will be direct like lip to skin action.
He's
And like
sucking it out.
sucking the blood out.
Holy shit. So they'll just cut a wrist or something and
Yeah, their wrist or their back is a really popular place to do it, using
okay.
just an X-Acto, like using a little blade,
They're
gigging essentially,
Yeah.
and then lip to skin action and sucking the blood out. And sometimes these vampires will have like several donors. They'll have 3 to 4 to 5 donors depending on who you are. They will typically have fangs too, but just for like the kind of the embodiment of the idea. There usually isn't like sort of fang
They're not functional fangs.
protrusion. Yeah, exactly. But it's a very real relationship, and like any community, any sort of system or community, there's discourse between the groups and different methods. According to Balthazar, his group is really involved in community outreach. So, for example, after Hurricane Katrina, his house went out into the public and set up food kitchens and fed the homeless. So instead of this like sort of archetype of vampires like kind of like stalking through shadows and feeding on homeless and stuff, they were feeding the homeless. They were bringing something to their community. And still in New Orleans to this day act as like sort of a popular community group to offer services. But he says that's not always the case everywhere. And
I bet. Well, in New Orleans, you would almost, you could understand something like that being embraced a little more just because New Orleans has such a rich history with all things paranormal and all things in that like sort of subculture. So I can see that there. But if you're thinking like, wait, does this exist in like Iowa?
Right.
Like, to imagine that community kind of thriving there. I mean, in like somewhere like New York City or like San Francisco or something, be like, all right, I could kind of see something like that happening. But like, these other little subcultures, like I love the idea that this all kind of happens kind of underground. And if you know, if you don't, you haven't got the faintest idea that this is a thing that's existing in a group that is thriving.
Yeah. It's cool to think about something like that in 2021, right?
Yeah.
That still exists, that things aren't on the internet that we just know about.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's
and I wonder
fascinating.
what an Iowa vampire party would look like.
I mean, I want to see what any of these vampire like are they dressing like what I imagine a stereotypical vampire is dressing like? Is there a cape and some kind of suit situation, or is it like Twilight? Like, what are we dealing with?
Some do. So what's funny is I met Balthazar and he was wearing like a Marvel Comics t-shirt and like jeans, and it definitely had like sort of an imposing Victorian era look about him with his tied back salt and pepper hair and everything. But there's actually a rift in that community. Balthazar's group being what he thinks is more authentic and more grounded, and then the other community which is more theatrical. So these are the folks that they get together and have big vampire gala balls where they all dress like they're in that Tom Cruise Brad Pitt movie.
Yeah.
And it's very, there's like seemingly there's more of like a sort of sexualized component to those ones as well.
Sure.
Where it's just like it's a lot of people like trying to go to these things and hook up.
Like Interview with the Vampire meets like Eyes Wide Shut.
Yes. That vibe. And so that's she's sold. So those definitely exist, and there's definitely kind of like, oh, they're just like posers, they're just playing around, they're not real vampires. But what's funny is once you're around these individuals, if like energy is a real thing, like, you've heard that some people think we can kind of like read on energy.
Yeah, of
And sometimes
course.
you like move through that. And some people claim to be empathic in that way and can kind of
Mhm.
sense that stuff. When you're around vampires long enough, you sort of, at least for myself, like I felt like I started to get a sense of their energy. And
Wow.
it was something I never been around. And in fact, in New Orleans, you can go to all these like sort of curio shops and occult shops and everything
Mhm.
else. And I found myself like going there right away after like experiencing that energy, just picking up like talismans and like all this stuff that I don't even know if I believe in, like
Yeah.
protection amulets and stuff, just to see if like there's a way that I could protect myself over this energy that I never encountered
Yeah. I
before.
mean, it can't hurt, right?
Yeah. I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean, if someone's suggesting this might protect you, this might help. I mean, yeah, I would veer in the direction of use it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, no harm done.
right, no harm done. Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So, you know, it was like months after, and I was doing an episode on the Queen Mary that's like parked in Long Beach and is supposed to be like sort of one of the hauntest places in America.
Ooh.
And it's a huge cruise ship, similar to the Titanic,
Okay.
and was used to transport folks from New York to England, and even had a part in the war effort in World War II.
Wow.
And so this place is parked in Long Beach, and you can go and stay there, and or you were able to go and stay there. And so I was down there doing an investigation and following this investigation essentially. And some individuals walked in to the restaurant, and it was that feeling again. Like I looked at them and I go, "Oh, you guys are totally vampires."
No
And I just like
way.
had that presence, and then I got to know them a little bit through the night and everything else. And sure enough, there was like some stuff going on. There was like a little bit of a like, and it was alarming to me that whatever that sense was, they carried with them, and I was able to distinguish it.
How did you say, like, are you guys vampires? Like, how did you ask them subtly without it being, because if you ask someone that and they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like,
Yeah, right. Well, I had to, it was one of those things where even though I'm confirming it, it was still we were hinting around it. It was like
Mhm.
that kind of situation where exact words weren't said, but they had attended a ghost investigation with us that night, and it was just a tour through like the bowels of the ship, and this guy was doing, EVP,
I
electronic
love
voice
that
phenomenon work and
shit.
stuff.
Yeah.
And as the night was rolling on, because ghost investigations are kind of boring actually sometimes. They last a long time, and you're just sitting there asking questions in an empty room. People started to split off like from the group, and it got down to just a couple of us, and a few of those individuals were a part of that group. And as we got to know each other a little bit, I like sharing with folks about what the podcast is about. And in case they have a story, I let them know that I'm a very non-judgmental person,
Yeah.
and that if they have something going on, they can share. And that's when I was able to sort of confirm like what their position was on
Wow.
things of vampiric in nature.
Damn, that's crazy. I feel like I got to do a deep dive on this. There's got to be some of that happening in Las Vegas, I would
Oh,
imagine.
100%.
There's got to be. Okay, so you have your podcast and you go and you're doing these docu-series. What and like you said, I mean, I imagine there is a lot of downtime of, whether you're confirming that a ghost is there, that a spirit is there. What are some of the moments that you've had of like confirmation?
Mm. Well, quite a few of them actually, which is pretty wild to think. A lot of times I feel very fortunate because people will do these things and investigate and maybe never ever get evidence that they're
Yeah,
looking for a confirmation.
sure.
But in some occasions, like I've felt like I've had experiences right along with the people that I'm covering that I can't deny, and also makes me feel very um awkward and self-conscious about myself, like, to
Mm.
tell you the truth, because they're so weird. A case in point, I was in kind of the hollers of West Virginia, and we were
The
talking to this.
Mothman.
Yes,
I
indeed.
got that book, by the way. It's
Oh, good,
downstairs.
good. You're going,
Yeah.
you're going to love it, and
Yeah.
it's, yeah, you're going to be delighted. So,
Great.
I was very close to like Point Pleasant, West Virginia. I was in this place called Braxton County, and it's this town where there is this other crazy monster from that era called the Flatwoods Monster. And but I wasn't there to cover that. It just happened to be in the same place of this old saloon inn, this dilapidated 3-story wooden chunk of scariness, that I went to go meet this man who had claimed to have a sort of a psychic relationship with a very, very wise um spirit guide or something when he was a kid, that people thought was just an imaginary friend.
Yeah.
So we were going through the story with him, and people can find that on the feed, and it's a really fun story. But we were standing there, and we were getting like tape of him. The sun had gone down, and we realized we were in the middle of this building, this old wooden building, without any electricity, and with just some moonlight coming in to kind of like light the scene. And he was taking us through the space as like kind of like a psychic that was like coming out. So through this interview process, he was kind of like revealing that like he could see people there with us at that moment.
Yeah.
And we were like, what?
Word?
What do you mean? So he was walking through these corridors, which was like the scariest like place I've ever been in my life, honestly. And he was describing what he was seeing in these dark rooms. And it was people like, it was a woman from the 1800s probably, and she's in this tub, and the tub is filling with blood, and then there's a baby, and then there's a tall man walking through. He looks like he maybe owned the place or is someone of note, and he's angry about the state of the building, and he's going and he's yelling at him and then leaving. And so there's all this like stuff going on, which was pretty overwhelming. And I said, let's hold on. Okay, this is good. Let's go back out to the corridor. Let's just talk a little bit and get ourselves out of the situation in this dark hallway. So we go out, and I'm trying to wrap up the interview as it's getting late, and it's weird. And I'm looking at him, and over his shoulder from the hallway comes marching a tall man that was like completely translucent, like from his head to his like bust area to his chest.
Yeah.
And he stands there, and I look at him, and then he turns around and goes into the door and out into a different room. And I couldn't rationalize what I saw, because that was exactly what this guy was describing to us.
Yeah.
His features, everything else. And I just saw a Scooby-Doo ghost.
Oh my God.
And, I didn't tell anyone. Like, I didn't tell the guy. I didn't say like, oh, shut up, man. Like, do you know what I just saw? Which would probably have been really great tape for my podcast. But I didn't say anything. And then we had a long drive. We drove from there like all the way to Charleston that same night. And the person I was with was this guy, Greg Newkirk. People know the Newkirks from the web series Hellier.
Okay.
I was with him, and he's seen the weirdest stuff in the world. And I didn't even feel comfortable telling him on that drive.
Wow.
I felt so bad about myself.
Why? Why did you feel bad about? I don't get it.
Well, because I had tried to stay, like I was saying, I was trying to stay neutral.
Yeah.
For as long as I could, even though experiencing things, I felt ashamed in having to be that guy that says he saw a ghost like that, because it seems too good to be true, and it seems too unreal to be believable. So I didn't want to become one of those people that would be looked at in that way, I think. Yeah. So it was a defining moment for me, and a learning lesson to really finally fucking understand what these people feel like that I'm featuring, because they're coming to me with those stories that they feel that way about. And they're saying like, hey, listen, I haven't told anybody about this, but this thing happened, and I saw my mom or whatever as a ghost. And they're feeling that same way as me usually, like totally
Wow.
self-conscious,
Yeah.
not wanting to look like a nut. And I think that's what that was. If we can, kind of just be stereotypical and assign a meaning or a lesson into that,
Yeah.
it was totally to be like, dude, get over yourself. Like, these are what these people are sharing with you and trusting with you. And now you know what that feels like on the other side.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I can see
Yeah.
that because I mean, yeah, if something that you know is going to sound so unbelievable, and then you feel like you gotta be like, no, like for real, that happened. That like
Yeah.
you don't even really want to tell that story because you know
Yeah.
people aren't going to believe you anyways.
Right. Yeah. And
Yeah,
in my position, it would be like, this guy is just, he's just hyping up his work. He's just trying
of
to
course.
he's
Yeah,
being,
they think
whatever.
you're
And
using
it's,
it as a business card.
yeah, right.
Instead, yeah. Huh. Okay, so what are like during the podcast and some of the stories that you've been able to tell, which ones really stand out for you as like the stories you've been so happy to be able to help share?
Yeah. Mm. This last season was really interesting because it had to happen all over Zoom.
Yeah.
And so it was the first time for this show that I wasn't able to go and share space with these people. So I tried to replicate that by having a lot of Zoom conversations with them in
Hmm.
chunks. And, and a lot of it not recorded, a lot of it just hanging out to try to assimilate some sort of version of a personal relationship with these individuals, which is honestly a pleasure, but also a considerate amount of time that I
Yeah.
spend to just allow myself to be open and let people in and then let them know it's reciprocated. That's why I spent a week in like rural Indiana last week, is to be present and to have that relationship.
Yeah.
But what I think was really powerful about this last season is that it worked. It seemed to work. And people through Zoom were seemingly more forthcoming than even when I've done these things in person. Because I think there was a little bit of sort of a security blanket
Yeah.
around
You're in the
these
comfort of your
very
own
personal things.
home.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can
Yeah.
kind of change it for sure.
Yeah. Like maybe your cat's on your lap or whatever.
Hmm.
Like you can find a little bit of peace. And so it was surprising to me, and some of the stories were really riveting because they were anonymous folks. This season was a lot of listeners of the show
Yeah.
that reached out and said, listen, I want to tell my story for the first time. Like, I haven't even told my family.
Wow.
And so those those moments are really special,
Hmm.
and you feel like a great sense of responsibility in helping these people shape their stories for the first time. And a lot of them deal with, again, like, these stories, they're not just ghost stories. They're always about something that is happening with them as a human. It's always, it's maybe there's a ghost involved, but it's about the person moving past an abortion they had, or
Right.
dealing with the death of a father,
Hmm.
so yeah, I think that season in general was really emotional and intimate in a way that when I'm having to like hike on a red rock mountain to get an interview with somebody is just different.
Yeah. Wow, that's so fascinating. I mean, that's even when I started doing this podcast, it's like that's what I want. I want to just be able to have these like, really pared down conversations with people where they can drop their guard and we can just have like, it's like having that like safe space for people to come and there's no judgment being passed. It's just asking questions about things and letting people tell their story. And
Yeah.
it is so cool when people can be in that comfortable space and yeah, share experiences that they've had. I mean, whether it's just like through life or in your case, dealing with the paranormal aspect of things.
Yeah.
What do you know about the demonic hour?
Oh man. What is the demonic hour?
So isn't the demonic hour between like 2 and 3 in the morning or something? Of like, because isn't there like a certain window when a lot of paranormal activity tends to happen? Or am I just getting this through different movies and whatnot and it's being fed into my brain?
No, I definitely think there's probably something to it. I know some of the stuff that I've read, in particular to like UFO sightings,
Mm-hmm.
happen mostly on Wednesdays at
Oh,
like sort of that time, like 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. sort of timing.
weird.
And I think that represents, sort of for the week, it's like the ultimate middle ground
Yeah.
almost. And there is this whole reoccurring phenomenon in the paranormal of middle grounds being an expression of the phenomenon itself, and or at least like a portal to the strange. So, I think you're right. Like middle of the night, right? Like typically things will happen then to people other than like, 5 p.m. on a,
Yeah.
Friday or something.
Yeah.
And there's probably a lot of factors to that, but I think in witness accounts we see that like over and over and over again. And it's called this idea of liminality and liminal spaces, and liminal being like sort of that in between. And so a lot of paranormal activity will happen in places of in between. So hotels, right?
Yeah.
Train stations, schools. They'll even happen in between places like doorways and windows. Mirrors can be considered liminal spaces. Any place where there is a transition between here and there seemingly have the most accounted paranormal activities across the board, whether that's ghosts or cryptids or UFOs. And so there is something really strange about this idea of like the demonic hour. And I think that's probably what has inspired that in pop culture, is because there's such an overwhelming amount of evidence of being like, yep, totally happened in between.
Well, because that's why I bring that up, is because, the story that I was telling you before when John and I were in Seattle was, the house that I was living in when I was last living at home. It was my mom, my brother, and I. But anytime there would be these really loud knocks on my door and my brother's door, which they mirrored each other down a set of, maybe 3 stairs. Our rooms were across the hall from each other, but there'd be like this loud thwop on the very top of the door. And it was always around 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. So that's what made me kind of look into it, because I was like, that's got to be something. Like, why is it happening here? And then I would notice it happen in movies and happen in different things. And I was like, oh, I wonder like what there is to that, of like that, which I guess, I don't know if it's actually called the demonic hour or what. I know I've read that somewhere. I did not coin that term.
Yeah.
But
that's your next podcast, right?
The demonic
That's the title
hour?
of the next podcast.
Yes.
That's our podcast, Renee.
Yes, exactly. The demonic hour.
Yeah.
But that stuff would always like really fascinate me. I still have that time frame in my head that, especially when John's gone on the road and I'm home alone, I'm like, okay, if I wake up in the middle of the night and it's not reached 2 or 3 o'clock yet, I'm like, oh, something weird could still happen.
Oh, really?
But if I wake up and it's like 5 o'clock, I'm like, whew, all right, we're good. It's the morning. Nothing weird's going to happen from here on out.
Right.
It's funny, I'm even saying that. I don't know that I've even like fully registered that my brain works like that until I just said it out loud. But it's true. You wake up in the middle of the night and you check to see what time it is.
Yeah.
I do that a lot, obviously now with the baby. But I often find that I'm like, hey, if it's past the 2 or 3 o'clock, it feels safer for me to like not worry about something spooky happening.
Yeah.
I'm such a believer
smokes.
in that stuff anyways, but not that I think like I've never had any kind of paranormal experiences in our house or in Las Vegas. But yeah, I definitely did when I was back home and was living in that house and knocking on the door, the walking up and down the stairs, a lot of pacing throughout the house all the time. Just feeling like you were being watched. There's something that you can't really put your finger on there. Like something is happening. There's that energy. You can feel some kind of an energy sort of shift, and you always kind of want to look over your shoulder and like wonder what's happening. Why do I feel this way? But yeah, I think there's something too. Like, Toronto is such an old city, and there's the ghost tours through there, and there's so much like rich history of, through the old music halls and the old theaters and the old hospitals. Taking those like ghost tours can be really, really cool, just to, learn about the history of a city and what some of those like ghost experiences can be. I love leaning into that stuff. It's the best.
Would you ever go back to that house to like see what was up, or if it would happen again? Or
I would. So I'd be down to do that. Nobody from my family lives there anymore. So it was right before I moved out when I was about 19. So here's like, in this part, again, I guess this is where that self-conscious part kind of kicks in, is you feel stupid telling certain parts of it. But It was right before I was about to move to Los Angeles. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was like, I'm packing up. I'm going to be a star. I'm getting out of here. And I was like packing my bags. Like I literally had like my suitcase on the ground. I was like getting ready to go. But I remember waking up in the middle of the night because I heard someone whisper in my ear and felt my ear hot of somebody say, I'm coming with you, and whispered it in my ear. But I don't like it's that weird thing. I'm like, did I make that up? Is that real? Is that not real? I don't know. But I do remember waking up and just feeling like so startled. My ear was hot as if somebody's breath had just been by my face.
Yeah.
And somebody saying, I'm coming with you, as I was getting ready to leave and move.
Gosh.
Yeah.
And they didn't, obviously. Like
they didn't.
The experiences stopped at that point.
I did not feel like it had like attached itself to me in any capacity or anything. But so when I was moving to LA, my mom came with me because I was a child and didn't know my ass from my head. So she like flew down with me just to get me like settled in like the house that I was going to be staying in and blah, blah, blah. But during that time, her and I had spoken about it. So even like when we were all living at home, her, my brother and I, because my brother had left to go to college as well. So he had just moved out. We all moved out around the same time. But none of us ever really spoke about the house being haunted when we lived there. I think we were all kind of like, what the fuck? But none of us ever really said anything. And it wasn't until we were all moving out that we're like, that place is haunted, right? And we would all share our experiences of the same thing. Like my mom would be in the shower and, you know, she'd just be like in the shower with like the bathroom door closed, but her little dog had followed her into the bathroom and she could hear me on the outside of the door being like, Lola, Lola, come here, puppy. And mom's like, just open the door because the dog's barking and going nuts trying to get out. I was sound asleep in my room. It was like not me talking to the dog.
No.
Yeah. So we all had these like bizarre stories. So it was when I was going to LA, my mom was with me and we had been speaking about it. And then when she flew back home, she had read a scripture from the Bible, and we're not religious. We were not raised on like religion or anything, but she had looked up. She's like, oh, maybe this is a way to kind of get like to clear this space and clear the energy. I mean, whether you're saging something or reading a passage or whatever.
Yeah.
But she went home and she did that. And she said that nothing else ever really happened after that. Wow. It was like closing a chapter, like making peace with the spirit that was there. But I don't know. I mean, it wasn't like it was like a menacing spirit or anything like that, but there was definitely like an energy and a presence within that house. It was
the whisper's like pretty, like the whisper's pretty intense. You know what's crazy about that, Renee, is that even though they didn't, I'm not trying to freak you out, but I'm just trying to make like a broader point here. I
hate where this is going. I'm listening.
What's interesting about that is that although that spirit didn't follow you in that specific way with the knocks and everything else, like you're still like, if you wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning,
that's
you're still like going like, oh, so it kind of did follow you in that way.
Interesting. I mean, unless that's just like my like trauma. I'm like terrified of the dark. Like I'm so afraid. I'm such a little bitch when it comes to the dark. Like I like to sleep with the TV on. And that's the thing too, is if I wake up and I'm like, oh, the TV's it's still playing reruns of Frasier.
Yeah.
But if it's like past a certain time, I'm like, okay, I can shut it off now. I can like sleep in the dark in peace. I know that it's early enough in the morning that it'll be fine. But if I wake up and it's like 1:30, I'm like, hell no, I'm keeping that shit on.
Yeah.
Give me that light just in case.
There's nothing wrong with that. I honestly, because I'm not like afraid of ghosts. I'm not afraid of the dark. I've just had too many weird situations. But like, let me be honest. Just a couple of days ago, I was staying at this place called the Story Inn in Story, Indiana. This is where I was.
Okay.
And on all like sort of the top 10 lists and everything online, it ranks as, if not the most haunted place in the Midwest, one of the most haunted places in the Midwest. And I stayed in the room where there's sort of like the blue ladies here, this is the blue lady room. This is the one on all the press and everything. And I totally slept with the lamp on all night long.
Yes. I was going to say,
totally
if you didn't, you're a psychopath. Like you would have to.
Right.
There's
well,
no
it gets
way
to the point where
to.
It's a really interesting thing. And it's kind of a mind fuck, I think. But, I'm there like to work, right? Like I have to collect tape. I've got interviews I got to do. Like I'm on a schedule that nobody else knows, just myself, of like all the stuff I'm trying to collect. and I can't be kept up by ghosts.
No, I
Like,
got shit to do.
that's not a part of the story. You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to get stuff. So there have been times when it's like messed up my schedule. Like in New Orleans, for example, I stayed at a haunted hotel, and it was just a hotel, but everything is haunted there, right? So, and I was woke up like several times by something. And it's kind of a funny story. Like, I'm laying there, I'm, deep in sleep, and the alarm, nobody changed the alarm, like the clock alarm of the room, which is, if you like, wrestlers probably, like, they hate this stuff, I'm sure. Like anyone that has to travel a ton, like when that happens, it's such a bummer, because it's somebody that's catching a flight or whatever, and it completely messes you up. It was like 4 a.m, goes off, I turn it off, go back to sleep, does it again, and this time I unplug the thing. And I'm laying there, it's like 4:30 or 5 a.m, and I start to feel this shake on the side of the bed. Like,
no, hell motherfucker,
it
no.
felt like somebody's hand was at the foot of the bed, like a parent or something, like how they do. They're like, wait. It was like that. And they were shaking the bed gently, and then they kind of stop. And I had remembered some advice this paranormal investigator, John Tenney, gave me. And it was, when you're interacting with a paranormal, it's almost like a game is happening, and the paranormal can kind of nudge you and go like, hey, want to play? Want to play? And so I remembered that, and I had a really busy day, a lot of tape I had to collect. I knew I needed to make a choice at that point in time whether I was going to engage or not. So even though I felt like a crazy person, I leaned up after this continuing to happen. I leaned up and I go, if you're a spirit, like, and you heard that alarm and you're trying to help me wake up by shaking my bed, I so appreciate that. Like, thank you so much. But it was not for me, and I don't have time to play right now. Like, I need to go to sleep and get some rest. Can you go away for a while? I laid back down. It never happened again.
Message received.
So
wow.
I don't know if that's real or not. I don't know if there's like a swamp cooler or something below my room that was like having, and maybe that's so, but like the timing of everything, the intent felt real. And I later learned that in that hotel, like kind of a phantom maid or something is a very common occurrence at that hotel I was at. So yeah.
Spooky. Yeah. What is your favorite, like, do I call it like a ghost theory or ghost story? I mean, like, you had kind of briefed me on the Mothman, which I'm going to take a real big deep dive in. What are some of like the famous ones that really stand, that like you love and that I should know more about?
Yeah. I mean, Mothman is a great start because you're also reading John Keel, and John Keel is my favorite author in general. He's one of those guys, one of those era of guys that were traveling the road in like sort of mid-century, writing articles for like Playboy, and was a writer before he was an investigator, right? Then he started like, these concepts, these stories, these witness accounts started to be introduced to him, and as a writer, they were compelling. And so he kind of just fell into that rabbit hole of what all this could be. Yeah. And so works by him that like sort of reveal stories and concepts around cryptid creatures like the Mothman, or the theories about ultra-terrestrials.
What's an ultra-terrestrial?
You're going to have to read about it. Like, okay. It'll take me too long to explain.
Okay.
But it's essentially this theory that like there is, let's just say this, there's like a common link potentially between all paranormal phenomenon. And so that ghosts and UFOs and even Bigfoot, like there's maybe something more connected there than what we give credit. And then there's kind of this universal idea of what the weird could be. And so even though I'm not a devotee of any particular theory, it is the theory that feels most entertaining to me. Okay. Early UFO stuff is really good that you could look into. Oh, yeah. There's a case called the Maury Island Affair that I think you, with your sort of journalistic background, would be compelled by, because it is an introduction to how journalism and popular media decided to handle the UFO phenomenon in relationship to the government. And there was a lot of like smoke and mirrors, like pro wrestling suspension of disbelief stuff. Like there was a lot of kayfabe stuff going on.
Some fabery.
Some fabe. So that's a really interesting story to look at.
What about the
affair.
McPherson files that you were telling me about? So I tried to look this
yeah.
up. Where do I find that? Because I did try to look it up.
Yeah,
I
you
had
can
no luck.
Yeah, you can find it. It's called the McPherson tapes.
Oh, the McPherson tapes.
Yeah, as of last month, it was on Shudder.
Okay. Good. I actually just reestablished my Shudder account. So
good.
Back in.
Yeah, very good. I love Shudder. They've been my longest sponsor on my show, so I appreciate them very much. But yeah, you can find it on there, and it's kind of like a interpretation similar to the Blair Witch. It's like found footage, and it kind of chronicles the experience of these people that are experiencing alien abduction.
Love that shit.
And shot in that way. So it's incredibly frightening. It's and that's another topic that I think is incredibly fruitful, and what you might really like are books by guys like Bud Hopkins, John Mack. There's a really great biography on this guy, John Mack, by Ralph Blumenthal, who was a staff writer for New York Times, called The Believer. And I'm actually talking to him this weekend for Night Drift. And it's a great book. Like you'll fall in love with some of these individuals that were, kind of researching that field as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah, but there's so much, and it gets way weirder as well.
I love all the weird.
Yeah.
Okay, so where can people check out Defy, and when can people check out Euphomet?
Yeah, you can find Euphomet at euphomet.com. It's EUPHOMET. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. I also do a live radio show out of Seattle called Night Drift. It's on 1150 KKNW at 5 p.m. Pacific time on Sundays, and then has its own podcast feed as well. And Defy Wrestling, you can find it at defywrestling.com. We have a service called defyondemand.com, which you'll be able to see this guy John Moxley in his first match in Defy. He's just like this guy you might want to check out.
He's
an
not
incredible
bad.
main event.
Got a good future ahead of him.
He's got something to him, some quality, Kid's gonna go far. Yes, and it's at Defy NW all over social media. And we're coming, maybe we're coming to a city near you, because we're coming to LA later this month. We're gonna be in Portland, and then back in Seattle. So
hell yeah. Awesome. Well, Jim, thanks so much for taking the time. This could be like a several hours long podcast because I have so many questions and there's so many different avenues to have these conversations. But you are my very first episode of the spooky oral sessions for the month of October.
Appreciate it, friend.
Yeah, thanks,
thank
buddy.
you. Yeah, maybe we'll continue it if you come up November 20th.
Yes, I think I am. So
all right,
get ready.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, dude.
Thanks, Renee.